A shocking news update in this 2024 presidential election is that Kamala Harris has picked TIm Walz, the governor of Minnesota, to be her running mate in this upcoming election. As you guys can see here, now we have the full Wikipedia of who is going to run in this election. And for a lot of autists like me, this is, touching a very sensitive nerve here, because now we have the final adversarial slate. We have Kamala Harris and TIm Walz versus Donald Trump and JD Vance. Now think about it. We have a person like Kamala from California. We have TIm Walz in Minnesota versus Trump from Florida/New York. And we have JD from Ohio. That is the vague shape of the election. But let's get into the details and the polling. So right now, Kamala Harris, since I've been doing these videos, is actually in the lead in the popular vote. Now, is this an accurate prediction? Is this an accurate summation of the polls come November? I don't really think so, but we won't really know how good the polls are accuracy-wise until about September, when we're pretty close to the election. That being said, we're less than 100 days out, and so as of 3 months out from the election, Harris is technically leading in the polling aggregate by 0.5 percentage points. Again, Joe Biden was leading on August 6th, 2020 by 6.4%. And so she's still way behind Biden. Now, I bring this up because Kamala, in order to beat Trump like Biden did in 2020, she's going to have to win the independent vote, which is a big ask. And then beyond that, the white vote. So my problem is that other leftist pundits also, like, what was the guy's name? Nate Silver of FiveThirtyEight, that guy said that actually she should have picked Shapiro, and it's also truthful that Shapiro would have been the obvious candidate. I mean, we have a guy in Shapiro who has like 60% approval rating in a state like Pennsylvania, which is literally the most important state in this election. And granted, that's with a bias that I'm from Arizona, but I'm at least self-aware to know that Pennsylvania matters more in this cycle. The point being, though, is that with the tipping point state being such as that it is, why wouldn't you pick the Keystone governor, Kamala? Well, there's a couple of different reasons. It could be one of two. It could be that John Shapiro just didn't want the job because he thinks that Kamala is going to lose, and so why would he run on a losing ticket? Or rather, maybe Kamala didn't want to pick him because he was Jewish, and because maybe he was too Zionist for the people on the far left that were Palestinian sympathizers. Now, that is a troubling prospect, because what that means is that the Democrats are either gauging this Israel thing as being a really big deal, which actually helps the Republicans in that case because of chaos for the incumbent candidate, or presumably they are just that out of touch with their own base that they are outsizing and kind of disproportionately analyzing this small Arab base in their party. And so either way, it's a bad look for Democrats. But anyway, let's get into the math as to why TIm Walz is personally probably one of the worst options. As you guys know, I made a pretty long-winded video about all the VP candidates that Kamala could have picked. And to be honest, I skimmed over TIm Walz. I gave him like less than 30 seconds because I thought there was no way he was going to be picked. God forbid somebody with logic was actually picking candidates, because all of a sudden Kamala picked TIm Walz over Josh Shapiro, presumably, or even Andy Beshear or Roy Cooper or anybody more reasonable. But the problem with TIm Walz goes to his electoral record. If you see here, you'll notice that TIm Walz has consistently been more liberal than about 60% of his fellow House members. So he's sizably to the left of the average Democrat. Well, there's a lot of math behind this, okay? So as people understand vaguely, there is a left and right to this country. Well, what does that mean, guys? Well, there is a left and right to this country, which means that, vaguely you'd say Kamala's left and then Donald Trump is right, but there's smaller values to this, okay? And bases in elections, like in the Republican or Democrat Party, are going to discern these differences. Chief amongst them being, are you far left, as in progressive, as in socialist, or are you more Clintonian neoliberal, okay? More towards the center, a blue dog Democrat like Joe Manchin, okay? Now, TIm Walz might come off like, okay, he's a 60-year-old white guy. I mean, you would assume he'd be reasonable by the independent standard, but instead he seems to be pretty far left. Now, is he burning out there? No, he's not quite Bernie Sanders, but is he closer to Elizabeth Warren than Joe Biden? Probably. And the way that I would explain it to you guys that are not as nerdy as me is that you have somebody like Joe Biden, who is center left and is basically the vanguard for the basic opinion, white bread opinion of the Democratic Party. And then you've got slightly to the left of that, Barack Obama, kind of. Then you've got people like Harris. Then you've got Elizabeth Warren. Then you got Bernie Sanders on the far left, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, the squad types. Okay, so basically, TIm Walz is like, in terms of leftists, he's probably like a 7 out of 10. Okay, if Bernie's a 10, then Tim is a 7. This is not good. Again, Joe Biden beat Donald Trump on the merits of him being a 70-year-old white guy. You can trust Uncle Joe, stable, the white dude behind Obama. That was the vague science behind that. And you might say, oh, this is very racialized language from a Mexican. But the truth is that that's the way people perceive it, okay? And so TIm Walz phenotypically, just if you look at him at the grocery store, you don't think he's actually that Democrat. But when it comes down to it, he might ward off independents. Like I said, he's more liberal than the average Democrat in the House. Now, House Democrats are not the most popular people, by the way. Moving on, when we look at his favorability, this might be a good thing for Harris, though. If you look at it, he's seen favorably over polls in the past few days. You can see that he's up 5, up 4, up 13. So this is still an interesting result because obviously the majority of Americans still don't even know who he is yet, and that's going to change. But the point being is that of the few people that do know who he is, he's doing fine. Now, when it comes to the polling with his own people, he's the governor of Minnesota, like I said. You'll notice that in February, so 6 months ago, again, the funding isn't there for polling. Anyway, 6 months ago, 55% of Minnesota voters gave Walz a positive approval rating, whereas he had like about 40% against him. So that's a positive 15. And so that's decent. That being said, Minnesota is like a 10-point Democrat state, depending on who you ask. And so he's like at a net 5, if that makes sense. So it's like if you're approved in Alabama by like 20 or something. Anyway, so it's not the most remarkable result. And let's look into his electoral history. So obviously, when we look at 2018, which is the biggest election he's involved in, you'll notice that he won the governorship by about 11 percentage points. Now, you might say that's a good amount because Minnesota is a swing state, but the truth is that it's more so a white whale and fool's gold than it is a swing state. Beyond this, obviously, you notice that obviously in 2018, the Democrats won the generic popular vote generally by almost 10 percentage points. So for Tim Walz to outperform that by like 2 against a Republican like Jeff Johnson that, assuming you don't live there, you have no idea who the hell that guy is, then it's not that impressive. Again, maybe I'm player hating, but the point being is that he's not an electoral juggernaut like some might be saying. Anyway, so like I said, his track record is decent just on paper. Obviously, he was in the military to a high degree, the Nebraska Army National Guard and the Minnesota Army National Guard for 24 years. And so he has that going for him. J.D. Vance also, as a foil, went to Iraq and whatever. And so maybe that balances each other out. He was a high school football coach. And so you can see how he's fitting into the diagram or diagram, Venn diagram like Kamala likes, of a white guy who's also liberal but comes off moderate. Now, will he pull this off? I doubt it. Now, the reason being is that we have some opposition research that I took like 5 minutes to do because obviously this just happened today. But let's see what the potential attacks could be against a person like TIm Walz. So first and foremost, so here we have an insightful post by Gabe here. Okay, so Gabe Guidarini says, and he's a right-wing guy. Obviously, I've known him for a long time. Okay, Walz is a perfect, gentle parenting HR nanny state candidate. Okay, again, this is from the right wing. This is how he's going to be characterized. So this is because think about it. If you're Kamala, you want to win over some Republicans. Obviously, you would want to in any election. So this is what the messaging ought to be for Republicans. So let's see. Everything he did in Minnesota perfectly exemplifies the nanny state. Okay. Extreme COVID measures on normal people. Electronic snitch on your neighbor system. Okay. Endless welfare handouts. Almost total immunity for BLM riders. Okay. Now, these are damning accusations. You might say, wow, these are totally slanted. And obviously, you know, Republicans are going to have their opinion. But when it comes down to it, these are actually objectively somewhat true. So, for example, with the COVID thing, that's unpopular. Now, to relitigate the past on that might not be a strong suit for Trump, who probably lost the election in 20 over just that alone. That being said, though, when it comes down to the BLM thing, that's going to be a nice sticking point. Why is that? Because again, the BLM riots were horrible, and even if Tim Walz tried to fight it off with police or whatever, the truth is that if you're the sitting governor, it would still hurt you. Kind of like how maybe Trump was hurt by some perceived inactivity by him with deploying the National Guard and whatever else in these riots. Okay, it was a nasty thing, and people saw thousands of dollars being looted by the second, basically, in Minnesota. And so when you see police precincts on fire, you can see how the suburbs might react and recoil to it. Now, here's another interesting aspect of his personality that a lot of people will forgo. So a lot of people won't pick up on the fact that Tim Walz was a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America and was one of the most radical and woke branches of the Protestant faith, okay? So look at this. Look at this. You'll see what I mean.
I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and let us confess our faith today in the words of the Sparkle Creed. I believe in the non-binary God, whose pronouns are plural. I believe in Jesus Christ, their child, who wore a fabulous tunic and had 2 dads. And
Okay. So, I mean, if that's your church, bro, you can see how this kind of works. Now, again, this is kind of a charged subject, but I'm going to go for it because I don't care. The point is that TIm Walz is one of these like white liberal, I would say wine box, but he's a step above that, maybe Chardonnay. But the guy's definitely this liberal suburban, not elitist, but you know what I mean? He's kind of out of there. You know, he believes in Jesus Christ, but he believes that Jesus had two dads, which semantically might be true, but you can see how that's kind of like a distortion of what we are raised as Christians to be, you know, look up to. And, you know, oh, he wore a fabulous tunic and I praise the non-binary God or some shit, you know, like this is insanity, folks. You play that clip to the suburbs. Are you going to tell me some Rust Belt Christian is going to say, yeah, damn, I'm going to vote for these guys? Hell no. And what are they going to be running on? Abortion. Okay. And while that is a popular issue, tie that in with the whole ridiculous denomination of Lutheranism he's a part of. And you can see how wacky he might come off to the middle American voter. Again, the sales pitch by the Harris team will be, he's a middle American white dude. No. I don't think it'll fly. I mean, that clip alone is damning. Like, honestly, if I knew a guy went to that church, I'd be creeped out by his existence. To be like, I praise non-binary God is beyond. You know the song God is a Woman by Ariana Grande? This is like that on steroids insofar as like lunacy and detachment from reality itself. So as we can see here, when we move on to the 2022 election, he actually won by only 8 percentage points, which is not great. So again, he's electorally mid, honestly, to be clear. And so he's not going to add a lot. And again, if he gets painted as a far leftist, which he definitely will be, I think, he's not going to really help Harris, in my opinion. And moving on. So let's get to the bottom line of why Harris might have picked Mr. Walz here. So apparently, when you narrow down the list of dozens of people down to Josh Shapiro, Pennsylvania governor, Mark Kelly, senator of Arizona, and TIm Walz, governor of Minnesota, you'll notice that they were invited by Kamala to the Naval Observatory for a one-on-one meeting with her, and she describes it as a chemistry test. So you can kind of see how kind of like high school girlish this comes off. But anyway, Harris and her staff wanted to take as much time as possible, considering the stakes of the decision. Okay, so if you look at this, she slept on this process, and apparently she made a decision on Monday, and you'll notice that she apparently gelled the best with TIm Walz over Shapiro and Kelly, which is interesting. Now, Shapiro obviously had a governorship to vacate if he were to actually get on the ticket theoretically and win. Also, you have Kelly, who also would sabotage his own Senate career had he joined Harris, and lost especially. The point being, obviously, is that these people seemingly probably just rejected Harris, even though, in my opinion, Mark Kelly would have helped Harris on the ticket. I believe John Shapiro would have helped her a ton. And now all of a sudden she's relegated to Walz. So with about 12 minutes of exposition, let's get to the actual prediction itself. So as of right now, the polls have Harris winning by 0.5. Again, this is before they pull the whole Walz effect. I mean, the most recent poll was from like 3 days ago. And so what we're going to do is just say, okay, well, how does this affect the popular vote? So as of right now, in the latest polls, Harris is up by 0.5. Obviously, if you had Joe Biden beating Trump by about, let me see here, 4.5. So let's look at it. So what you would do here is add 4 points to the 2020 result in all the states, and you'll get your final aggregated result. Now, here's another thing, guys, in chat. Like the video, first of all, because it's your homework. But second of all, before you get expelled, I'm going to tell you that TIm Walz is going to, I think she's... I can't even tell. Is he going to be a net neutral because whatever, or is it going to be because he's going to drag her down slightly? Again, TIm Walz is a white dude, 60 years old. Just in the vague sense on paper, I think he would help Harris slightly because she is diverse and she is, but at the same time, his record is so attackable that it seems like maybe he could be a liability. I'm not sure. So for the sake of the argument, I'm just going to leave it as a neutral because I'm not sure yet. We'll see how JD and Donald Trump respond to this new candidate on the ballot. The point being, though, is that for the sake of the ticket, obviously Minnesota becomes resolutely blue. And if he doesn't deliver Minnesota for Harris, I mean, he'd be worse than Sarah Palin easily. Sarah Palin's nice in person, at least. But anyway, let's move on to other states. I think Maine's at-large district will go blue. So just the state as a whole. But I also think that other states are also going to be blue. I think Colorado would stay blue. New Mexico, Virginia. I mean, these aren't really debatable. New Hampshire is some place that I think Walz would do great in. Again, there is a niche, and again, I really have to reiterate, this is a very obscure sort of knowledge I have, but basically there is a strain of Protestant white people in the Midwest and some in the Northeast that are like Christian culturally, but also are of a denomination that is like liberal politically. A lot of Methodist, but also Lutheran more in specific. Again, you saw the church that Minnesota Governor TIm Walz was a part of, but also when it comes to New England, you have plenty of rural white people that are Christian in places like Massachusetts that are deeply blue. And so there is that niche. Okay, you might say as a heuristic, like, oh my God, minorities vote blue, but some of these white people also do. And so keep this in mind. And I think Walz appeals to these types. So I think New Hampshire would be safe blue, or safe blue as in, like, obviously it would go blue. Now, would it go by 3 or 10.7? Who cares? Now, Nebraska 2nd District, I think that Trump would also lose this one because, again, he lost it by like 7 last time. But moving on to the states that actually are going to be pretty close, I think that Trump would win Arizona pretty easily. Arizona, just demography-wise, is just pretty good for the Republicans nowadays. They have done a great job in getting their registrations up relative to Democrats. So that, again, that is voter registration. Now, Nevada is a similar story. I mean, Walz wouldn't do anything there. Also keep in mind, Georgia and North Carolina are somewhat different now. You would have thought previously, when Biden was president, that North Carolina and Georgia would be to the right of Arizona and Nevada, but instead it might be the opposite because of the black vote. Okay, Kamala might be energizing the black vote. Apparently, Trump is winning Georgia by less than 1 right now, even though he was winning by like 5 last month. And so that indicates that it'll be a lot closer. That being said, I don't see why Walz would put Trump's lead of 1 down to negative, obviously. And so I think that would be pretty good for the Republican Party. But moving on to North Carolina, I think this state is a little difficult because, again, we have a similar issue with Georgia in that the black vote might be something that makes up a lot of ground in the suburbs. Obviously you lose white votes to Trump, but then you make it up with minorities. But at the same time, North Carolina is also more, I don't know how to explain it, but the infrastructure, the party infrastructure in and of itself is more favorable to Donald Trump, in my opinion. Okay, you had Michael Whatley, who runs the national circuit now, but he ran a good ship in 2020. And so I think that he would easily win that state. But now Trump's at 268 to 226 by Harris. Again, Harris would have to play defense on all 3 of these states. Now, will TIm Walz help her in this case? Maybe slightly. Like I said, there was a niche amount of like Nordic white people that were immigrants from like the late 1800s, early 1900s, or of a liberal Christian faith. But, I mean, in a nationalized political setting, would that really make the difference? And I would beg you to think no. Pennsylvania, for the most part, is probably going to be the most likely to go Republican out of the 3 Rust Belt key states. Beyond that, obviously, she didn't pick Shapiro, thank God, for Republicans. And so for that reason alone, I think that Trump is likely to win Pennsylvania because, again, Kamala and Walz have no record that would help them at all in the state. Again, it's not like Walz was known as a fracking governor or a guy who was known for coal mining or anything. I mean, what the hell would the appeal be? Michigan, on the other hand, might be closer to blue in this scenario. But keep in mind that Biden won the state by less than 3, and Kamala's down 4 points in the popular vote compared to Biden. Again, she's winning by 0.5, whereas Biden won it by over 4.5. And so if you add 4 to Michigan, that's also a red state, actually. Now, it might be close, though. The last state is Wisconsin, which would also go red by this logic, because, again, Michigan, in my opinion, is the most liberal out of the 3. Of the big three blue wall states. And so here we go, 312 electoral votes for Donald Trump and JD Vance to Harris versus and TIm Walz, 226. Now, this video is interesting because this is my opinion based off of like no factors like polling. This is just of the day that he was picked. As of right now, I think that this selection of TIm Walz actually hurts the odds of Harris winning the presidential election by like 5 percentage points. I think Trump has like a 70-ish% chance of winning. It probably went up to like 78 or something because truth is that he's got the economy on his side. There's a looming recession possibly. And TIm Walz is a horrible candidate. I'm a nerd. I know more about him than the average person does. And maybe if we get an truncated election process where the attack cycle really gets him in a frenzy, then maybe the opinion of him with white America will be sullied and the middle class will say, you know what, actually you are a far left progressive and not a cool one like Sherrod Brown who might be blue collar, at least the way that he appeals to people in Ohio. Instead, TIm Walz is like one of these like soccer dads, I don't know, man. But anyway, like the video if you liked it. It means the world to me if you subscribe. If you're not subscribed, if you want more content like this, or if you have any suggestions, leave them down in the comment section below. Until then, I'll see y'all in the next one. Adios.